The Origins of the American Revolution, Part 1. This lecture is the first of 4 on the origins of the American Revolution. To begin, let's hop in the time machine and go back to Philadelphia in Pennsylvania in the year 1750. Philadelphia is the most influential city in the British American colonies. It's a city humming with commerce, alive with cultural and educational institutions. It's electric with the concept of new beginnings and a landscape of possibility. There seemed to be endless prospects of wealth and influence for those who applied themselves. And overall, British America and the British Empire was so settled, so serene. It was solid and secure. It was a monolith certain to last for centuries. And the jewels in the crown of the British Empire were the flourishing British American colonies. How did the American people feel in 1750? They were proud and intensely loyal. Americans adopted London clothing styles. They adapted and faddishly followed English rituals like tea time, and they pored over London newspapers. Prominent citizens and future revolutionaries like Ben Franklin referred to England as their home and their wise and good mother. George Washington, a young Virginian, wanted nothing more than to be a professional British Army officer. The colonies were grateful to Britain for repelling threats from the French and the Spanish. As the historian Ralph Ketchum put it, the outcome of these conflicts meant literally life or death to the colonies, still in tender immaturity and threatened on all sides by what they rightly regarded as the aggressive French or Spanish despotism. The relationship between the American colonists and the British Empire was not without friction, but the colonials gave, as the historian Ketchum writes, constant, effusive, and heartfelt expressions of love for Great Britain. But it was a relationship not without tension. There were things that the British were doing that the American colonists did not like. For instance, there was something called the writ of assistance, which is a blanket search warrant in which British authorities could enter anybody's house without probable cause or identification. The colonists were being taxed without their input. Even though the colonies paid only 1/12 as many taxes as English subjects, the American colonists were not consulted about the taxes and could not vote for their representatives. Among these taxes was the Molasses Act of 1733, which regulated the sugar trade with the West Indies. It was a tax on molasses production, sugar production. It was a tax that could be collected but was not. This was a policy known as salutary neglect, a policy that the British followed for decades. In 1754, there started to be skirmishes between the French and the English on the American colonial boundaries. It burst into full-blown war in 1756, a war that in American history books is called the French and Indian War. In British histories, it's called the Great War for Empire, and in European histories, it's called the 7-Year War. This war lasted from roughly 1756 to roughly 1763, and it was a war between France and its Indian allies and Britain and its Indian allies for control of North America. It was the last of 4 wars for control of North American colonies between France and England. This war, which lasted about 7 years, ended in a treaty in 1763 that was called the Peace of Paris. The results of the treaty was this: Britain emerged victorious, and France vacated North America. All the French lands east of the Mississippi went to the control of Great Britain, and all the French lands west of the Mississippi River went under the control of Spain. The result of the war was that the British Empire became the most dominant in the world. The Native American population was involved too. They were allies for both the French and the British during this war, and the Iroquois Confederacy in the Northeast provided a buffer between the English and French interests. With British success came problems. The British had an immense war debt. They had difficulties in administering and defending this new territory in North America, and the question was, where would they find the money to govern such a huge empire? Britain failed in this public policy making. The question is why? The 3 major factors why Great Britain failed in this public policy making were: 1. what each side, the American colonists and the British Empire, knew of each other. Second, how they imagined each other to be. And third, how they defined the problem. The British policymakers were aristocrats who were woefully ignorant of the colonies. They viewed the colonial Americans as crude, inferior, distasteful people who did not know their place. It was a very deferential society, and the British expected the American colonists to simply give way to British authority. They could never be considered gentlemen in the eyes of the British. The conviction most firmly in the English mind, as the historian John Miller wrote, was the superiority of the true-born Briton to the American colonists. The colonists were regarded as degenerate Englishmen or as the scum of all nations, a hodgepodge medley of foreign enthusiastic madmen, and a mongrel breed of Irish, Scotch, and Germans, leavened with convicts and outcasts. Honor was crucial to the British. Deference must be paid to the superior. So the British looked upon their colonial problems as not only financial, but as challenges to their honor and authority. The colonies had been too independent, too unruly, and they needed control. Colonial Americans, in the eyes of the British authorities, were children, and ungrateful children at that. The colonists must always, without protest, be dutiful and obey. This attitude began to be manifested in policy, and colonists reacted. They reacted because of their independent nature, a belief in individual liberty, and the concept of being free from oppression. In part 2 of this lecture, we'll see how in this frame of mind, Britain moved aggressively in the 1760s to address its problems, and how this gave rise in the American colonies to the idea of perhaps becoming independent from British control.